Let's open our Bibles to Esther chapter number 3. Pick it up at verse number 12 with the very sad part of the story that Xerxes has allowed himself to be manipulated into agreeing to the annihilation of the Jewish people. Now, he doesn't know it's the Jewish people, not really. All he knows is what he's been told. There's a group of people that don't seem to fit very well into your kingdom, and if you will just give me, Haman, permission, I will annihilate them and bring you profit, bring you value into your treasuries. And so he agreed. And so verse number 12 of chapter 3 says, "The king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month." Remember that Haman had started asking the spirit world on the first day of this month which day to pick. And so he ended up picking the 13th day of the 12th month. So 11 months previous to that date is when the official documentation starts being put together. And it can't just be put together in one language, because the Persian Empire sprawls across the world from the foothills of the Himalayas to the western shores of Turkey, up almost to the Ural Mountains, and down deep into the headwaters of the Nile. And there's plenty of languages. So this is written out according to all that Haman commanded. It was written to the king's satraps, to the governors all over the provinces, to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script and every people in its own language. So all those different people groups are going to get a copy of this annihilation decree in their own language, in their own alphabet. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring, which he just handed off to Haman, the Agagite, the Amalekite that hates Jewish people and wants them all dead. Verse 13, letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to plunder their goods. So this is tons worse in its planning than what was actually accomplished by the Nazis of World War II era. The Nazis under Adolf Hitler took several years and killed off 6 million plus Jewish people. This guy is trying to kill off the entirety of the Jewish population in one day. And you know that behind all this is Satan. Let's just be very plain about that. God had made promises related to the ethnic Israeli people, that they would always exist, that they would be blessed, and that they would become a blessing. And that in your seed, Abraham, which would be the Israeli people, in your seed, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. So Satan was well aware that God was planning to do something through this ethnic group called Jews. And the best way to defeat God was to stop him from keeping that promise. And the assassination of all the Jews in one day would certainly accomplish that. So this is a demonic, satanic assault upon God. And so the plan is every Jewish person, doesn't matter about their age or gender, they're all going to die. And then their stuff is going to be taken. This is the thing that I think cinched the deal for the king, even though he didn't know which group we were talking about. He was told that millions upon millions of days' wages could be recovered into the treasuries of the king if this people group were done away with. And since he's just come back a few years ago from a disastrous invasion of the Greek homelands, he wants to replenish those funds. And that's going to come from the booty, the leftover possessions of those that were killed. And again, you cannot miss the parallels to Nazism here. All of us have seen the historical documents, the photographs of the gold and silver and possessions that were taken from the Jewish people as they were taken off to execution camps, even pulling gold teeth out to recover that precious metal before they were taken and destroyed. Just horrendous. And this guy, Haman the Agagite, wanted to do all that in one day. Verse 14. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. And the couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. All right, now we need to understand that some time passes between the 13th day of the first month, when this decree was made official. That was all taking place behind the scenes among the bureaucrats. It's all happening there. And it's being written out. More than likely, it's also being put into the cuneiform letters on clay tablets, and then those clay tablets are going to be baked and made into the permanent law of the Medes and the Persians. But it's also being translated into every single language that exists in the empire. So all of that takes time, apparently a couple of months. And once all of that is done, it is released at exactly the same time in the third month of the year. Probably to make sure that there's no rumors that spread from one region to another because they got the information and the others didn't. So all that information gets released in the third month, and that's when the Jews in Susa hear about it and realize that they have been targeted for execution in the 12th month of that same year. So only about 9 months away. Now, chapter number 4. When Mordecai learned all that had been done. So he finds out at the same time, here in the third month. Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. This shouldn't surprise us a bit. He is devastated by this annihilation order that every ethnic Israeli, every Jew in the entire kingdom, millions perhaps, are going to be killed in a single day of this year. And he grieves over it. Now, there is something weird about the book of Esther, and that is the name of God doesn't appear anywhere in it. And yet God is all the way through the book. It's just one of those unique qualities of the book. When Mordecai is tearing his clothes and putting on sackcloth and ashes, he is clearly praying. He is petitioning God. And every other Jew in Susa, as well as throughout the entire Persian Empire, are doing the same thing. They are all putting on their sackcloth and ashes and grieving and praying to God. Now back to Mordecai, verse 2. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. Now we've talked about the fact that he works in the palace normally. So he's usually in the gate, in the administration area of the palace. But because he is in grief, because he is in mourning, the law is that he's not supposed to enter the gate area. And so he is a respecter of the law, even when that law includes a decree to kill him and all Jews. And this is an amazing thing about him. He still tries to be a good Persian citizen, which reminds me, folks, that that's what we're told as Christians in the New Testament. We are supposed to obey the laws of the land, unless, of course, they are in direct contradiction to an order given to us from God. So we as Christians should be the best citizens of whatever country we find ourselves in. We should be the most law-abiding, the most pleasant, and obedient peoples. I know that's not going over very well in our modern-day American society, where Christians seem to get this idea that being rebels is a good thing. Unless the law is in direct violation of another directive from God, we are supposed to obey the laws of the land. It's that cut and dried. And so here is Mordecai demonstrating that reality. He is grieving over an annihilation order, but he does not violate the rule of staying. He has to stay out of the palace when he is in mourning. So he's at the gate. Verse number 3. In every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. Now, when Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. Now, what has she just been told? She's been told that her dad is laying in sackcloth and ashes at the front gate of the palace, that he won't come in because he's grieving. And so she gets upset by that. Now, by now, she is definitely in her 20s, and she has been functioning as the as the queen of the kingdom for several years now. And so she is upset when she is told by her officials that this is going on. So she sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. So her first solution is, well, send him some proper clothing so he can come in here and tell me what's going on. But he won't put it on. He stays in his sackcloth. Then Esther called for Hatak, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So she sends this official to go out and inquire what is going on, what is so high priority that needs to be grieved over that you won't come into the palace. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews, so that millions upon millions of dollars. And Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. So Hathach finds out verbally what's going on, but he is also handed a decree issued that day. It had just been published today, this morning, if you want, that is written in the land or in the language of Susa for Esther to read, that all the Jews are to be annihilated on the 13th day of the 12th month of this same year. And that Haman is the source of all this problem. And that the only thing that's going to save them all is that Esther has to talk to the king. So Hatak went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. And Esther spoke to Hatak and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I've not been called to him into the king these 30 days. So Esther sends a message back. Mordecai, you and everybody else knows that there is this law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be broken, that to approach the king without an appointment is a death sentence. The only exception to that rule is that if the king makes the exception and holds out the golden scepter to you and invites you into his presence. Mordecai, I have not seen my husband for 30 days. I don't know why, but he has not talked to me. He has not called me in for advice and counsel and conversation for 30 days. It's possible if I went into his presence, he would have me killed. Verse number 12. They told Mordecai what Esther had said, and Mordecai told them to reply to Esther. All right, now, this is the core of the book right here. Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. Now remember, he's told her not to reveal her ethnicity, not during the process of being selected, nor afterward. So only the most intimate people in her circle know that she is ethnically Jewish. And so Mordecai says, I don't want you to think that just because that information has been kept private up to this point, that it will remain private. You are not going to escape this death order any more than the rest of us. Verse number 14. Now here's where the faith comes in. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. So Mordecai tells Esther, you need to do this thing. But I'm telling you, if you don't, God is still going to save the Jewish people because of his promises. And then you will be pushed aside. You will be nothing in the history of the future. You will be erased, you and your family, because you did not stand up for what was right at the right time. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. I love that line right there. And I think the answer is yes, this is exactly why she's in this spot. She is here to save the Jewish people because God already knew, living outside of time like he does, that there would be this assassination attempt, this annihilation attempt, this satanic plot to stop God from keeping his promises. And so God secreted her away as a special weapon to be used at just the right moment. And so Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa. Hold a fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day." Now that's a super fast right there. When you go without drink as well as food, that is a very serious fast, because you can only go about 3 days before you get into physical danger of fatal dehydration. So this is really pushing it when you do a fast like this. So she says, you go and be involved in a very serious prayer service with the other Jews. And then I and my young women will also fast as you do. And then I'm going to go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So she says, we're all going to pray. We're all going to fast. And then I'm going to try to do it the way you told me to do it, sir. Dad. And if I end up dead, well, I guess that's just the way it's going to have to be. It's either dead now or dead 9 months from now. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. So this is all inclusive counting. The fast, the 3-day fast, starts on the 20th, continues into the 21st, and the third day of this fast is going to be the 22nd, whenever she goes in to the king, which is described in chapter number 5. It says, on the third day, Esther put on her royal robes. So she had been fasting before, which often included this idea of putting on sackcloth and not doing your normal hygiene of washing and anointing with oil. So she's left that behind and made herself look like the queen she is. And then she stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's quarters while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance to the palace. So she goes into the area of reception where the people with appointments gather in order to go in to see the king. So this is actually off limits unless you have an appointment. And this is what she told Mordecai about. Anyone that comes into that reception area that does not have their name on the list can be executed unless the king makes an exception. And it doesn't matter how powerful you are. You risk your life showing up in this area. Now, thankfully, because of God's hand in this whole story, verse 2, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to Esther the golden scepter which was in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. So he does the exception ceremony. He reaches out the golden scepter and invites her to come into his presence, and she touches the scepter, and she now has an appointment. The king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request?" "It shall be given you even to half of my kingdom." Now, we still don't know why that he hadn't talked to her for 30 days. That never is explained in the story. But she is clearly in his favor. He wants her to smile. He wants her to be happy. And he tells her at this moment, whatever you want, I will do it. I'll even give you half my kingdom, if that's what you'd really like. And so Esther said, "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I've prepared for the king." So she has apparently also had her staff put on a meal at her house, at her particular part of the complex. And so the king, having been invited, said, "Bring Haman quickly so that we may do as Esther has asked. because he's apparently not in the area. So the king and Haman came to the feast which Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, "What is your wish? It shall be granted you. What's your request? Even to the half of my kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." So they've been invited. It's a nice special meal between the three of them. It's interesting to me, did Esther eat at this meal? Or was she still fasting and they just didn't pay attention to the fact that she wasn't eating like they were? She then draws out the process a little bit longer. And I think this is all because God is setting up the rest of the story. Because God is going to slap down this attempt to annihilate the Jewish people with a very heavy hand. And so this is part of the setup for that. So the king asks her again, "What is it you really want? I'll give you half my kingdom because you are just such a wonderful woman." And so Esther answered, "My wish and my request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I prepared for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king said." So she draws it out even more. She tells him, "Well, I'd like for you to come back tomorrow for another special meal. Just the three of us. Just you and Haman and me. And then after that meal is over with, I will tell you what my special request is." And Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart. So he's all excited that he's been to one special meal with the king and queen, and he's got another special meal that's coming. And then his day gets ruined by seeing Mordecai.